Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with tuna melt nachos. That's right, I love nachos. And a tuna melt's one of my favorite sandwiches ever. So it was only a matter of time before this video appeared on the channel. And speaking of time, we are right in the middle of friends coming over to watch the game season. So I think the timing for this is perfect. And to get started, we're going to want to use some nice high quality tuna, which for me means the one packed in olive oil. Okay, I think it has a better taste and texture. And since I do have an expense account, I went with that, as it is a little bit pricier. And what we'll do before we do anything else is break this up with a fork into nice small to very small flakes. And the reason we always want to do this first, before we add our celery and dressing, is because if you crush celery, it can actually get more bitter than it already is, which can happen if you add it first and then break up the tuna. So I think we want our tuna to look like this before we go any further. And once it does, we can go ahead and dice up a rib of celery. And because I think we want a very small dice, I'm going to cut this a couple times lengthwise so we have nice thin strips. And then once that's accomplished, we could just start slicing across into nice small pieces. But whenever we're cutting something like this, if we can, let's cut it in half before we start slicing across, since that one extra cut allows us to cut this twice as fast. Which doesn't sound like a big deal, but you're going to save like 5 seconds. And trust me, you're going to want those 5 seconds. And that's it. Once we have that beautifully diced, we'll go ahead and transfer that into our tuna, at which point we'll season this up with some freshly ground black pepper, plus a few shakes of cayenne, because why not? And then the only other thing I add to my basic tuna salad is some premium brand mayonnaise. Oh yeah, you guys know the brand I'm using, which actually goes by 2 different names depending on which side of the country you live. And no, as you probably noticed by now, I don't like any really large chunks in my tuna salad. Or canned tuna, even the good stuff, can have a really dry texture between your teeth. So personally, I think the finer the texture here, the better. And by the way, we didn't forget the salt. We actually don't need it here, since our chips are going to be salty. Plus, we're covering things with cheese. And that's it. Once we're happy with how that's been mixed and how it tastes, we can go ahead and pop that in the fridge while we move on to the rest of our mise en place, which is just a fancy French culinary term for our prep. And that's going to involve some cherry tomatoes and some pickled jalapeno rings. And for the tomato, we want some relatively thick slices, since they're going to need to stand up to a little bit of heat. So we will go ahead and cut those as shown. And then as far as our jalapeno rings, if you're lucky, they won't have any seeds in the middle, and you won't have to do any prep. But if some have some, an easy way to get rid of them is to use one of these small pastry cutters that come in the set. And that's a great tool for quickly removing the center. Luckily, most of mine didn't have seeds, so I didn't have to do too much work. But anyway, I just wanted to show you that little trick in case it makes things easier. And that's it. Once our veg prep is done, we can start laying out our tortilla chips on a foil-lined baking sheet. And you use what you want, but I'm only interested in the perfect ones here, since we are going to build individual nachos, which, by the way, is how the original nacho was designed. I know that can be shocking to someone that's only had nachos at the ballpark, and they're all piled up in a big, hot, sloppy mess. And don't get me wrong, those are amazing in the right setting. But a real true nacho is individually constructed. And once we have those all laid out, we need to do the old chip check. And if we see a chip that's extra curvy, I generally will replace it with something a little flatter. Not just so it's a little steadier to work with, but also if the tips of the chip are pointing up too high, those might burn in the broiler before the rest are ready. And that's it. Once our chips have been checked, they are ready to tuna salad. So what we'll do is take 2 spoons, and we will transfer on a generous rounded teaspoon onto each. And if everything goes according to plan, and you use the same amount I'm putting on here, you're going to be able to do 24 nachos, which is basically 4 portions, or 2 portions, or 1 portion, depending on who you ask. And that's it. Once our chips have been tuna fished, we'll go ahead and place 1 hopefully seedless jalapeno ring on each one. And as we do this, we should try to give it a little bit of a gentle press down. Alright, so that pepper's kind of sitting in the tuna. But don't press too hard, otherwise you're going to break the chips. And if that happens, just grab another perfect one and do it again. And yes, for a little hotter, spicier, fresher bite, we could use slices of fresh jalapeno here. But I think the acidity from the pickling really does add a lot to these nachos. So those are my recommended choice here. And that's it. Once our pickled peppers have been placed on, we will top each with a slice of tomato. And again, as we place those on, I like to give it a little bit of a press down. And the reason for that is when we place our cheese on, we want to make sure it's piled up nice and high in the center. And if the stuff underneath the cheese is too high, that's going to be harder to do. And then speaking of the cheese, once the tomatoes set, we can top each one with at least a generous tablespoon. And what I like to use is my classic combo of half Monterey Jack combined with half sharp cheddar, which I think gives you a perfect balance between tanginess and creaminess. But as usual, any melty cheese will work, so you decide. I mean, you guys are, after all, the head honchos of your tuna melt nachos. But no matter what you decide to go with, please promise me you'll grade it yourself. I know I say that every time, but I just can't stand the thought of you eating cheese shreds that are covered in cellulose dust. All right, that is just not something that's good to eat. And then what we'll do once each one is generously topped is take any of the remaining cheese and sprinkle it over any exposed parts of the chip, which not only makes for better cheese coverage, it's going to prevent those chips from browning too fast. And then once cheese, we can finish these in a really hot oven, like 475, or my preferred method, under the broiler for a few minutes. And we'll do that until our cheese is hot and melted, and our chips have started to turn a beautiful golden brown. And please be brave. All right, the nacho gods hate a coward, so I really do want you to leave those in there until those chips get a little bit of color. But fair warning, under the broiler, these will go from golden brown to golden black in a couple seconds. So pay attention and don't walk away. And that's it. I'm going to finish these with some freshly sliced green onions because these do not, and I repeat, do not need anything else. All right, if you want to defile these with a bunch of sour cream and guacamole and salsa, feel free. But I'm going to eat my tuna melt nachos just like this, since nothing else we would add would make these any more perfect. And that, my friends, if you enjoy a good tuna melt, and or you like nachos in any form, is something you are absolutely going to love, since they pretty much taste like both things at once. And as great as these are eaten right off the pan fresh out of the broiler, I did go ahead and transfer some onto a plate so we could observe it in its natural habitat, which would be next to a nice cold beer, a watermelon wheat to be exact. And it should come as a shock to no one that that was an absolutely perfect pairing. But anyway, that's it, what I'm calling tuna melt nachos. I would eat these anytime, anywhere. But if you do have some friends coming over to watch the game, and you normally just serve regular nachos, I think you should serve these instead and see what happens. And not to spoil things, but what will happen is people will love them. But whether you serve these at a party or just some random weeknight when you want something a little bit different, either way they're beautifully easy and delicious. And I really do hope you give these a try soon. So please follow the links below for the ingredient amounts, a printable written recipe, and much more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.